In Borderlands 4, you're choosing between 4 unique and more customizable than ever Vault Hunters. They have the biggest skill trees we've ever seen in a Borderlands game. In fact, each Vault Hunter has a bigger tree than 1, 2, and 3 combined. In this video, we'll be deep diving into VEX, a cynical siren with demonic powers. We'll be running through her 3 action skills, how they can be modified with Augments and Capstones, her 3 skill trees, their skill paths, as well as all the passives and how they combo together with her kit. This is going to be a huge video, so buckle up, drop a like and follow, ×2 playback speed if you just want to see the skills, and hopefully, by the end, you'll know if VEX is the Vault Hunter for you. First, each Vault Hunter gets a unique trait. VEX gets Phase Covenant. VEX is attuned to the elemental type of her current gun, converting all action skill and melee damage into that type. Kinetic or physical damage still counts in this case. So say you had a corrosive weapon, your action skills will do corrosive damage as well as your melee attacks, meaning that if you play VEX, you should keep an eye on which elemental effects you have equipped and try to keep a wide range in your inventory. Switching to Shock against shields, for example, benefits VEX more than other Vault Hunters because her skills will get the bonuses as well. However, they also get the negatives, aka damage reduction. So keeping a shock weapon equipped against armor will hurt you more than other Vault Hunters who can simply use their skills without them getting reduced as well. But overall, a powerful trait if you pay attention, and there are many ways to further this effect in all her skill trees. Let's go through her 3 action skills. The first is Dead Ringer. It has 3 charges, spending 1 spawns in a phase clone minion. You have to press left or right click to choose between Spectre or Reaper. These clones lose an ever increasing amount of health per second, meaning they will eventually die no matter what you do. Remember how I said you need to pay attention to your trait? Well, these clones get the elemental type of VEX's weapon when they spawn in. So if you have an incendiary weapon equipped when you summon one, they'll do fire damage even if you switch to corrosive. The Reaper taunts enemies off you and deals melee damage, while the Spectre fires at range with gun damage but can't move. It has a 35-second cooldown per charge. If you don't like temporary pets, well, good news everyone, Phamiliar is a permanent one. Simply having this skill equipped summons out her minion, named Trouble, to stay with you until it dies, at which time it will respawn after a 20-second cooldown. By pressing F, aka the action skill button, you'll teleport Trouble to what you're targeting, dealing damage. Trouble also turns into Big Trouble, a badass version, restoring its health and increasing its damage for 20 seconds. If Trouble is dead, pressing F will respawn him. It has a 45-second cooldown. Maybe you don't like pets? Well, Incarnate would be the action skill for you. Activating causes a phase explosion around you, dealing damage and restoring VEX's health as well as making her 25% faster. This makes for a powerful oh shit button, but there's more. For 25 seconds, you can press F to fire Eldritch Blast from her offhand. Being on the offhand means you can keep firing your gun while this mode is active, which you want to do since gun damage reduces Eldritch Blast cooldown. All 3 action skills are tied to different skill tree paths with their own 3 branches, making for 9 total branches, though these trees will contain things that benefits the skill that they're tied to. You can have any action skill equipped and invest in any skill tree. It might actually be part of your build to invest in multiple skill trees. The tree contains Augments and Capstones, however, that are tied to their particular action skill. They can be equipped with 1 Augment and 1 Capstone. The Augment often modifying the skill and the Capstone severely modifying the skill. But you need to unlock them in one of the 3 skill trees the action skill is tied to, and I'll go through these when they come up. Her first passive in the Dead Ringer skill tree is Sanguine Fiends. Every time you kill an enemy, VEX and her minions regenerate 20% health over time with a 5-point investment. This will go a ways to offsetting your Dead Ringer minions' health degeneration and also keeping Trouble out of trouble and yourself healthy, which benefits idle hands. Based on the fullness of your health, you get up to 36% increased reload speed. I've mentioned before that I dislike these kinds of passives because they never give you enough reload speed to be worth it. Say your reload is a slow 3 seconds, you would only get a 1.08 second reduction for 3 points. Why not 50%? You aren't staying at 100% HP, so the reduction is bound to fall off. However, your Spectres get the benefit of faster reloads, which means faster activations of the Augment coming up soon. Cold Iron gives VEX and her minions 15% increased gun damage with a 5-point investment. The only minion benefiting from this are your Spectres. However, a 15% increase to your gun damage is huge for such an early passive. Battle Inscriptions gives VEX and her minions 30% increased melee damage and maximum health. This will affect Trouble and your Reaper minions, but without investment gear or something like the Throwing Knives Ordnance or the Phase Knife skill you might get access to soon, you won't be using melee damage much yourself. This changes, however, once you reach the Haruspec's passive in the middle branch, but I'll talk about that when it comes up. Dropping down a tier, we have Grave Assault. When you kill an enemy, Vex and her minions gain increased fire rate for a duration. 7.5% per stack, 22.5% after 3 kills, which lasts 10 seconds. So we have passives that increase Vex and her minions' combat effectiveness in different ways so far. Trouble or Reapers, however, can't use fire rate or gun damage. Your first augment is Ghast Blaster. With it, your Spectres gain the ability to use Ghast Blast, dealing gun damage to all nearby enemies on impact. They cast it when summoned and when reloading, so you can see how reload speed helps them, as well as gun damage and fire rate. It's a cocktail of synergies. Portents of Suffering gives Vex and her minions 30% increased status effect damage for a 5-point investment, so if you know you're using a lot of elemental effects and spreading statuses, 30% more dot damage is nice. The next augment in the tree is Coven. Spawning a Reaper grants Vex and her minions 10% health regeneration for 20 seconds. Spawning a Spectre grants Vex and her minions 10% critical chance for 20 seconds. Both effects stack up to 3 times, so a max of 30% each. Both are huge if you invest in cooldown reduction and other ways to get your minions out more often. If so, this augment can be quite powerful. The next passive is Cursed Blade. Vex's melee attacks apply Cursed to hit enemies, making them take kinetic status effect damage. It's basically a bleed effect, but in another tree. There is an actual bleed effect, so they can't name it that. So they take this bleed anytime they take gun damage, so your melee becomes more potent, boosting your overall damage if you mix melee attacks into your damage rotations. Though, like I said for the passive above it, you won't be using melee yourself much without investment, especially into Haruspecs, so if you don't plan on getting the passive below this, which lets your minions apply this effect, or if you're not investing in melee with gear to supplement, steer away from this passive. Blood Sacrifice for 1 point makes it so when your minions die, your kill skills are triggered. This includes Grave Assault, giving you more fire rate, and Sanguine Fiends, giving you more health regeneration. A nice parting gift considering Reapers and Spectres will be dying a lot. If you're picking this up for Trouble, it might not be worth the trouble. But keep an eye out for kill skills coming up. Vex has a ton of them, and they can be a build across all 3 of the trees that rely on this. Grave Fiends is another kill skill that will be activated by it. Vex and her minions deal 10% more damage for 16 seconds and up to 3 stacks, which is 30% more damage from all sources. That is a huge amount. Wouldn't you know it, Grave Quickening is another kill skill that gives Vex action skill cooldown rate, which is great for the Coven augment. 15% reduction per stack up to 45% at 3. You'll be summoning a ton of minions. Now we get to Extra Cursed, a 1-point investment that requires a point in Cursed Blade. Cursed damage now triggers on minion melee damage and deals increased damage when it's triggered by a critical hit. Suddenly you're not required to melee anymore to get the bonuses, and critical hits are extra juicy for your minions to have, meaning the 30% bonus from Coven is more attractive. Now we reach the 3 branches. If you're curious how point investment unlocks each tier, I over-explain it in the Rafa skill tree breakdown, so go check that out. The first branch starts with Blight Attunement. Instead of being a regular kill skill, it's a kill skill that requires you to get a kill with corrosive damage. When you do, you create a Haunting Remnant minion for 24 seconds. It seeks out enemies and deals corrosive status effect damage over time. When you kill in general though, you'll restore Haunting Remnant's duration by 4 seconds if it's active. So this will be the first instance of a particular element attunement being used, but not the last. With this passive, you'll want to mostly be using corrosive weapons, so your action skills and therefore minions are corrosive, and you summon these Haunting Remnants as much as you can. The augment of the branch is Wither. It makes your Spectres cast Wither on an enemy when they spawn, dealing status effect damage over time and increasing damage taken by 30% for 15 seconds. Killing a withered enemy allows Spectres to use their Wither again, making it that if you have Spectres out, everyone will be dealing more damage to their targets, and the effect, once removed with extreme prejudice, will be cast on another enemy.
Terminate with extreme prejudice!
So this branch will be encouraging you to mostly use your Spectres in corrosive mode. Prismatic Icon makes it so when Vex or her minion applies a status effect, you may apply another random elemental status effect at 30% of the initial status effect damage. Very effective in a status effects matters branch. For example, check out Keen Suffering, wherein status effect damage now gains a 15% chance to crit. Critical dot damage, yes please. With Ghast Debate, whenever... Wait, reading that out loud, I just realized what that sounds like. Whenever Vex dodges, she creates a specter nearby and becomes invisible for 8 seconds when she next shoots her gun. Take note that you can still do other things like cast skills for that 8 seconds. This has a 2-minute cooldown, however, so you won't be spamming dodge to summon an army. The Spectre will get the bonuses of all the passives and the augments you've since invested into. Shot to Go makes it so when Vex swaps her current gun, her new gun has its ammo restored by 20%. You may be swapping a lot to get the right elemental attunement for the enemy you're facing, and this will be useful for that. However, with Blight attunement, you're encouraged to keep the corrosive damage flowing. So there's a bit of counter synergy there, especially when you consider the next passive. Necrosis. Vex gains 30% increased corrosive damage and 15% increased corrosive status effect damage for a 5-point investment. With Necrosis and Blight attunement, you'll have a clear status effect favorite. The Capstone Heirloom seems extremely powerful, giving one Spectre you control a copy of Vex's current gun with a 25% damage reduction. Only one Spectre can have the copied gun at a time to balance it out, but you are essentially doubling your output with this. Well, when it's up at least, and it's more like 1.75 times your output, or less if you consider the damage the Spectres were doing before the Capstone, but shut up, it's cool, okay? All you need to do is find a powerful corrosive gun. This branch is all about status effect chance, corrosive damage, and Spectre minions. The next branch has a hotter focus with burning attunement. While Vex is attuned to Incinerary, Vex and her minions gain 30% critical hit damage and 30% status effect application chance. The effect lingering for 6 seconds after attunement is switched, so yes, get your Incinerary weapons ready for this branch, and yes, get your Reapers ready. Sorry Shepard, this one prefers Reapers over Spectres. The first augment, Hellish Harvest, buffs your Reapers. They gain the ability to use Hellish Harvest, dealing melee damage 3 times in a large area around themselves, and regenerate health for each enemy hit. They use it on spawn, and then every 3rd time they make a melee attack. They restore 15% max health per hit with this, so with how often it procs, they'll not only be doubling their damage output in an AoE, they'll be staying alive much longer. If they were spawned in with the Incendiary Attunement, they'll be burning everything around them like tactical nukes. Reoccurrence makes it so Vex gets a stack of Reoccurrence every time she deals gun or melee damage, and each stack increases her minion's gun and melee damage by 1% up to 50 stacks, so 50% total. Stacks of Reoccurrence are lost if a new stack has not been gained for 5 seconds, so if you keep up the aggression, your minions can get up to 50% stronger. Really nothing to scoff at. Reverberations makes Vex and her minions' melee damage have a 25% chance to deal Incendiary melee damage up to 150% of damage dealt. So yes, a huge burst of burning. Hitting 3 times with Hellish Harvest over a short span really makes the 25% chance seem much higher. Then we have Haruspex, I think that's how you pronounce it, which overrides your melee attack. Vex now instead throws out a Phase Dagger from her offhand that deals melee damage to enemies hit. Phase Daggers can critically hit, meaning that if you throw it at a weak point, it'll always be a crit. Killing an enemy now also resets Phase Dagger's 8-second cooldown. So if you like throwing knives, I know I do, this is an amazing melee override passive that suddenly makes the passives Foul Inscriptions, Cursed Blade, and Extra Cursed very powerful, especially when you consider that critting causes that 200% cursed effect, and you can easily crit by aiming for the head now. But it gets even better soon. First though, Burnt Offering with a 5-point investment gives Vex 30% increased incendiary damage and 15% increased incendiary status effect chance, similar to the passive in the last branch with Corrosive swapped over for Incendiary. I can't imagine this ever being bad. Grim Reaper is the capstone, and by pressing and holding F, you spawn a Grim Reaper instead. It drains nearby enemies, dealing status effect over time and restoring health for each drained enemy. When an enemy dies from being drained, there's a chance a new Reaper will be spawned. The cooldown is 2 minutes on the Grim Reaper however, but you can continue to summon regular Reapers in the meantime. This deals a lot of damage while keeping you healthy, and it's a Reaper itself, so it gets the bonuses applied to Reapers in this branch. Finally, we have Pincushion, which requires a 1 point in Haruspex because it now throws 5 Phase Daggers from both hands in a fan pattern instead of just 1 dagger. Killing an enemy now only refunds 33% of Phase Dagger's cooldown, but don't let that fool you. This is extremely strong, especially if you've invested in melee damage. I can imagine a melee damage build where you use Pincushion and the Throwing Knives Ordnance, as well as your melee Reaper minions. So yes, this branch is all about incendiary damage, your Reaper minions, and melee damage. You'd think the next branch would continue the theme of picking an elemental type, but no, that's reserved for branches in other trees. Prismatic Weapon makes it so Vex and her Spectres deal bonus damage with gun critical hits. Also, bonus damage is a random elemental type that changes on reload. This bonus is increased for each active attunement. 25% bonus damage that gets 50% more per active attunement, meaning this branch is, yes, going to reward you for swapping elemental types and applying them to different pets to keep multiple attunements out. This will be difficult to do in the heat of battle, but seemingly the damage is worth it. The augment of the tree is Banshee's Wail. Reapers can now use Banshee's Wail, periodically dealing damage to nearby enemies and granting overshield to nearby allies. Damage increases apply to overshield granted to allies. Damage enemies deal minus 50% damage for 10 seconds, so this makes your Reapers put out more damage while making everyone in your squad more tanky, including your minions and fiends, and friends. You can increase this tank by increasing your damage, which then applies more overshield. Win-win. Obedient Fiends makes it so Vex gains 25% more minion damage. Minion skills and command skills gain 25% increased damage as well. This includes the Banshee's Wail we just saw, which will in turn give more overshield. This passive will go a long way in boosting your minions' damage output. With Spirit Bomb, Reapers gain 30% maximum health with a 3-point investment. Also, when they die, they'll explode for their current elemental damage type. Minions will always eventually perish, so you'll have floating bombs now charging your enemies that you won't be so sad about dying. With Ancient Rites, Vex gains stacks of Ancient Rites for each of her active minions every second. 1% per stack, stacking 40 times to 40%. The stacks are lost when there is no active minion for 8 seconds. So if you keep your minions up, they'll be all doing 40% more damage. That's a huge amount when you combine it with other passives like Obedient Fiends and the next passive. Death follows closer. When Vex takes damage while at 30% or lower health, she spawns a Reaper nearby. This has a 2-minute cooldown. This Reaper gets all the bonuses of a Reaper that's summoned normally, so it's a strong oh shit button, as the Reaper will taunt enemies. Is Diner. For 1 point, Dead Ringer gains an additional charge, putting it up to 4, meaning that yes, you can have even more minions out, which aids in keeping Ancient Rite stacks up, so you might want to layer how you summon your minions. And of course, you also get all the benefits of having more minions out. Her capstone, Dark Pact, is the first we've seen that allows you to equip 2 Augments, meaning that you can buff up your Reaper and your Spectres with minion skills that both get buffed by Obedient Fiends, or buff up one minion type twice. Your choice, as the Augments are all very strong, but that's not all. You get the ability to use Dark Pact. Pressing and holding F fully restores the health of all active phase clones, as well as granting 30% movement speed to you and 30% minion attack speed for 12 seconds. Phase clones don't lose health over this time, and the health loss multiplier is reset when Dark Pact ends, the cooldown being 42 seconds. This essentially gives them a new lease on life, as well as letting you spam even more of them out. So you get a few, let them tick down until the health loss is too severe to recover from with your health recovery passives, then use Dark Pact and start summoning even more. By the time they fade, Dark Pact is up again. So the first branch of this tree is all about corrosive damage, status effects, and Spectre minions. The middle is about incendiary damage, Reapers, and melee damage. And this branch is all about getting as many powerful minions out as possible and keeping them alive and casting their abilities. If you love having minions doing your bidding and have them casting powerful, debilitating abilities on your enemies, the Dead Ringer tree is for you. But if you want just one powerful, loyal pet that doesn't leave you high and dry, Phamiliar might be the tree for you. It starts with Grave Sustenance. When you kill, restore 20% of your missing action skill duration. Solid skill for so early on, letting you get off your action skill very quickly. Keep in mind this is a percentage of missing skill duration, not your total. So killing 5 enemies won't fully restore your action skill. It's more like 80% down to 64%, down to 51%, down to 41%, and to 33% after rounding. So you'll still need to let time pass, but it's still very powerful if you rely on using your action skills often. Enchantment gives Vex bonus kinetic damage with weapons while her action skill is active. It's quite good considering that all her action skills have a way of boosting their uptime and all have at least some duration. You'll likely be firing off elemental damage as Vex, so having kinetic to balance it out is nice. With Blood is Magic, Vex deals 30% increased action skill damage the higher her health. 30% is a lot, but it does require you to stay healthy, which means investment in passives that restore your health. Having pets also goes a long way, which in turn get the benefit from the 30% increased damage. Hasty Fiends gives Vex and her minions a 15% movement speed and 20% damage reduction buff with no strings attached. This is a very powerful skill and, to me, without investment in other areas, is the best of this tier by a long shot. You'll appreciate 15% movement speed all throughout the game, and 20% damage reduction is universal with no strings as well. The next tier down we have Grave Command. When you kill, restore 20% of Trouble's command skill cooldown and respawn cooldown with only a 3-point investment. The command you activate by tapping F teleports Trouble to the enemy, exploding and making Trouble badass. Commanding Trouble is very impactful, so having this up more often won't hurt. The first augment is Violent Outburst. Like hinted at, it adds a new command skill. Trouble explodes himself, dealing ordnance damage to all nearby enemies and restoring 75% max health to Vex. Sounds bad, but if he is in his badass mode, aka you've used the command skill, you sacrifice 33% of his max health instead. So the ideal situation is to tap F to teleport Trouble to a group of enemies, then hold F to detonate him. This is a powerful health restore and big AoE explosion. Don't feel bad about turning Trouble into a teleporting bomb. You knew he was Trouble when he phased in. Note that this doesn't have a cooldown, so yes, if you find a way to restore Trouble's health, you can do it multiple times. Also, it uses ordnance damage, so if you're an ordnance build with powerful ordnance gear, you'll definitely want to pick this up, especially if you've headed to the first branch of this tree. Overprotective is another kill skill, and it gives Vex and her minions 20% overshield. Violent Outburst will ignore the overshield, but all other damage doesn't, so don't get this just to outburst more. 20% overshield is very powerful because you can be at full health and still get the effect, meaning that passives that want you at full health, like Blood is Magic, will really appreciate this. Blink Strike is the other augment of this tier, and it's also a command skill you get when you hold F. In this case, it Blink Strikes Trouble to an enemy, dealing damage. Blink Strike always crits enemies below 50% HP and has a 25% cooldown, which is reduced by Grave Command. Now this seems simple, but it will make Trouble more active. You can teleport him around the battlefield 2 different ways now with this augment, but you might want to save the blink for tanky enemies when they drop to half and keep Trouble on the others until then. Yatlan Bay is next and gives Vex's minions 25% max health. Vex also gets 25% gun damage for 8 seconds after commanding Trouble. Naturally, this is better for Trouble than it is for other action skills, and 25% is a lot. So if you like to spam Violent Outburst, you'll have a big uptime of the damage boost. You can very much build around this boost, so keep it in mind. You could also make a pretty effective kill skill build, if you consider the last tree, the tree coming up, and this tree's kill skills. This passive, Morning, gives all of Vex's kill skills 30% more effectiveness. If you reach critical mass of kill skills, this will simply make them all better. Claw and Bang makes Vex and her minions gain 30% more increased melee damage and ordnance damage. Once again, huge, and can be combined with the previous tree's melee boost to really get that damage up. Or the ordnance damage helps Violent Outburst, so you can start your way to an ordnance build. Overheal is a passive I think should have been linked to Overprotective. I mean, it's right below it and requires its effect, or one like it, to function. While Vex has an overshield, she and her minions gain 3% health regeneration, which is great if you want all those passives that benefit from being healthy. The next passive is Vorpal Fiends. I have to keep telling myself to say Fiends instead of Friends, and it's kinda disappointing. Vex and her minions gain 15% critical hit damage. That's it. More damage on crits. Boring, but effective. The first branch is Icy Attunement. Here it is, another elemental attunement to go with the corrosive incendiary ones in the first skill tree's first 2 branches. It's an attune kill skill, meaning that while Vex is attuned to Cryo, killing an enemy restores 20% ammo and ordnance cooldown. Effects persist for 6 seconds after attunement is switched. This is incredibly powerful as you'll keep your guns stocked up and be firing off your ordnances much more often. And you get this just for killing with an element you might already be using. With this branch's augment, Hex's Nexus, Trouble now taunts enemies, making them more likely to target him. You also get a press and hold F command skill that gets Trouble to charge its target, dealing melee damage in an area on impact and creating a singularity for 10 seconds. This keeps most enemies in place, so Hex's Nexus goes two ways in keeping the trouble off you by keeping trouble on them. The 45-second cooldown can be reduced with passives we have seen already, like Grave Sustenance. If you've buffed melee damage as well, this could put out some serious damage. Blast Rights gives Vex 25% overshield and 20% increased fire rate for 8 seconds after she activates an ordnance. For those who don't know, ordnance is the new gear slot for your heavy weapons or throwing weapons like grenades. They have their own cooldown, so you could use them far more often, and in turn, they can be overtuned by Gearbox. I loved them during my playtime, and getting such a huge reward for using them is very exciting. But it doesn't end there, there's more rewards for it in this tree. Overspirited, for example. Killing an enemy with ordnance damage or an action skill will spawn an explosive remnant that deals cryo ordnance damage to nearby enemies. Explosive Remnant gains increased damage based on overkill damage, up to 50% of it. This is huge. So if you blow up someone with powerful violent outbursts from Trouble, you'll set off more cryo explosions that get boosted up based on overkill, a chain reaction that really loves ordnance. Blasted Fiends furthers this by giving Vex 30% more ordnance damage, but also 50% of all increases to ordnance damage increases minion damage. Okay, the ordnance plan is coming together, and this is a very powerful passive when you consider that it will just flat improve your output in so many ways. With Corporeal, Vex and her minions gain 30% increased maximum overshield capacity and 30% overshield duration. While Vex has overshield, she and her minions gain 30% increased damage dealt. So throughout this tree, if you've picked up ways of gaining overshield, then this is a no-brainer. Shiver is up next and the last passive on this branch. It, like the other branches, focuses on an element and boosts that element. Cryo gets a 30% damage increase and its status damage is boosted by 15%. Powerful, but there isn't as big of a focus on Cryo in this branch than the others had on their element, especially when you consider the Capstone isn't exclusively Cryo based. Trouble Bubble gives Trouble an overshield whenever he deals damage, 80% of all damage dealt, which includes AoE attacks like explosions. Also, when in phase Phamiliar mode, aka you tapped F, Trouble gains an elemental aura, dealing ordnance damage over time to nearby enemies, so if you have a cryo weapon out, he'll be doing cryo ordnance damage over time. So this branch has a huge focus on ordnance damage and overshields, with a minor focus on cryo damage. So if you want to be a tanky ordnance user who blows his pet up for extreme damage like a cold bastard, this is the branch for you. The next starts with Elemental Essence. Vex gains 20% increased elemental damage, up to 40% when an action skill is active. So if your action skill is up often, which you can invest into, 40% more elemental damage from everything you do. Very powerful and adaptable, which is Vex overall in a nutshell. The augment of this branch is Vorpal Fang. Trouble gains a 10% chance to crit with all attacks. You also get a Hold F command skill that makes Trouble summon phase daggers overhead that fire at nearby enemies, dealing melee damage on impact and getting all the benefits of those melee buffs. It has a 35-second cooldown. So this is an augment that focuses on Trouble simply outputting more damage and cursing his enemies. Keen Fiends gives minion damage a 20% chance to crit. This is on top of Vorpal Fang's 10% chance, so Trouble will be critically hitting with roughly every third hit. Okay, but is this leading somewhere? It is. Infernal Sum is a payoff. Vex and her minions deal 35% more critical hit damage to enemies below 66.6% HP, aka 2/3 left. It's strange to have a restriction considering it already needs to crit to get the effect, and this increase isn't massive, but it is something. Sacrificial Essence is next, and it's a kill skill. Vex and her minions gain 7.5% increased damage dealt, but Vex gains 15% increased damage taken for 40 seconds, stacking 10 times to 75% and 150% respectively. Stacks are lost when Vex dodges or enters fight for your life. This is a lot of extra damage taken. Yes, you can panic dodge to get rid of it, but 150% is going to get you burst killed by a lot of enemies, especially bosses if you don't learn their patterns. The risk reward will be entirely based on your skills, so you'll need to consider if 75% extra damage is worth it to you, because it is a lot. Reawakening makes it so whenever Vex and her minions crit, there's a 25% chance to restore 4 seconds of action skill cooldown. To make this not broken, there's a 2-second cooldown on this effect. Now, it doesn't seem like much, but you'll be critting very often and your action skill will be resetting very quickly, especially with all the crit focus in this branch. The last passive of this branch is Tail Whip. For a 1-point investment, Trouble gains the ability to Tail Whip, dealing damage in an area over 2 hits with a 12-second cooldown. This is minion damage, so it can crit with Keen Fiends. Overall, this increases Trouble's damage output. Very much worth the 1 point. The Capstone is Double Trouble. Trouble now gains a 15% chance to create an illusion near the enemy when dealing damage. Critical hits have double that chance. Illusions also become badasses when you tap F for the Phase Phamiliar effect. You can have a maximum of 3 illusions and they deal 50% damage and take 300% damage. All these illusions can do the same things Trouble can, including Tail Whip, so this Capstone really highlights what this branch is about, dealing critical hits and increasing Trouble's damage output. Very simple, but it's usually the simple builds that deal the most damage. The last branch starts with Shocking Attunement. I'm sure you're shocked to learn that there was a boost to shock damage somewhere in these trees. While Vex is attuned to shock, she gets a 20% movement speed bonus and a 30% gun damage bonus while moving, encouraging you to stay aggressive. It's a big bonus if you love shock. The augment of the branch is Beast Mode. You gain a press and hold F ability where Trouble enters Beast Mode, becoming immune to damage and gaining 30% increased minion attack speed and movement speed for 10 seconds, 25-second cooldown. This is an oh shit button for when Trouble is in trouble or when you need a burst of damage from him. The cooldown is short and can be further reduced by other passives, so you have to imagine you'll be using it often. With Grave Current, when you kill, Vex's minions gain 25% bonus shock damage for 10 seconds, stacking 3 times to 75%. A lot of extra shock damage for doing something you're gonna be doing a lot, so it's good. How shocking. With Deadwire, when Vex deals gun damage, there's a 10% chance to spawn a Spark Remnant that will seek out nearby enemies and explode, dealing shock minion damage to nearby enemies. So if you have a shock weapon out, you'll be spawning explosive shock minions that get the benefit of all your minion damage and shock damage boosting passives as well as melee boosting passives. Grave Thirst is another kill skill that gives Vex 7.5% lifesteal and her minions 15% lifesteal per stack, up to 3 stacks for 16 seconds. This is another great passive that ensures you stay healthy for the passives all the way back at the start of the tree. It also means your minions will die much less often. Infusion is the first but not the last passive we'll see that interacts with a rep kit, a new healing gear item. Similar to a shield, it has its own stats and position in your inventory. When you press a button, you'll self-heal on a cooldown. With this passive, Vex and her minions also gain 30% bonus damage with weapons and melee for 15 seconds after. How good this is depends on your rep kit's cooldown, so get one with a low cooldown and enjoy spamming it for damage instead of healing. Here it is, the last passive of the branch, which gives Vex 30% more shock damage and 15% more shock status effect damage. We all knew it was coming and it's good. Unsealed is the Capstone and it makes it so Trouble gains the ability to mark his current target, causing them to take 50% more gun damage from Vex. When a marked enemy is killed, Trouble gains a stack of Unsealed for 12 seconds, granting 1% health regeneration and 10% increased damage per stack. These effects are doubled when Phase Phamiliar is active, aka you tap F. This is another Capstone that simply lets you output a ton more damage. If you think about it, it's a focused 50% more gun damage and 30% more damage from Trouble. Doesn't really combo with anything directly, so it's not that interesting, but it is effective. So when it comes to this tree, the first branch was all about ordnance damage and overshield with a minor focus on cryo. The second was all about dealing critical hits and increasing Trouble's damage output. This branch is all about shock damage and a minor in healing. So if you like having a permanent pet and dishing out damage together as a team, this skill tree might be for you. However, if you don't want pets, Incarnate might be the action skill you choose. It causes an explosion, heals you, and lets you throw out Eldritch Blasts for a duration. The first passive, Guns and Needles, is yet another that interacts with the rep kit, restoring its cooldown by 20% with a 3-point investment. This isn't 100% at 5 kills, it's 20% of the cooldown remaining, restored. It's not a passive that's particularly sexy, not like Volatile Essence, which gives Vex 17.5% increased splash damage, doubled while an action skill is active. Her action skill Explosion and the Eldritch Blast are all splash. Leeching Attunement gives Vex 10% lifesteal and 30% reload speed while attuned to kinetic damage. These passives are usually reserved for the branches. Gearbox knows that kinetic damage isn't attractive to people. But think about it, a powerful Jacob's pistol headshotting and ricocheting to another target, giving you a massive boost in damage and letting you reload faster. Grave Sights gives Vex a bonus 10% critical hit damage and 15% weapon handling after a kill, stacking 3 times and lasting 10 seconds. Simple, kill to hit harder and more accurately. Next tier down is Fiendish Invigoration. When Vex uses a rep kit, she and her minions gain 30% movement speed and fire rate for 10 seconds. So if you pick this up, make sure you use a rep kit with a low cooldown and enjoy using it for more than just healing. I'm sure there'll be some legendary rep kits that have multiple uses or ways to sacrifice something else to keep spamming it. The first augment is Geist Wave, and it makes it so instead of launching a phase explosion on activation, Vex launches a Geist Wave, dealing ordnance damage to enemies it passes through. Each affected enemy takes 30% increased damage for 15 seconds, making this a very powerful tool to wipe out particularly pesky enemies with. Note that it does ordnance damage, meaning that this is great to pick up for an ordnance build, and especially if you're investing in a branch that has an ordnance focus. Bloodletter gives gun and skill critical hits a 25% chance to apply bleed, causing kinetic status effect damage over 4 seconds. Note that this doesn't require you to do kinetic damage to get the bleed effect, so it's just a good damage increasing passive. The next augment is Energy Vampire. While the action skill is active, Vex deals status effect damage to nearby enemies over time and gains overshield for each enemy affected. When she kills while it's active, she gets a stack of Energy Vampire, increasing her status effect damage by 10% per stack, max 5 stacks. Stacks are lost when the action skill ends. So this is an augment very much benefiting from status effects and their boost. You'll be sucking your enemies dry and in turn getting tankier and dealing more damage. Grave Implements is next, and it gives Vex and her minions 15% increased gun damage for 10 seconds after each kill, stacking 3 times. 45% extra gun damage is nothing to overlook. It's extremely powerful, especially since you don't need to jump through hoops to get it. You'll be killing naturally. Channeling is next, and it gives Vex 20% more action skill duration and 30% more attunement duration. What is that? Well, if you had a kinetic gun as well as leeching attunement active, when you switch to another elemental type, the effect lingers for a bit, and this increases that linger duration. I think the 20% action skill duration alone is worth it if you really focus your build on your action skill. Material Components gives Vex 30% increased kinetic damage and 15% increased kinetic status effect damage. This is a passive usually reserved for the last one in the branch when it's an elemental damage type, but being kinetic, it shows that Gearbox knows the sexiest weapons are the elemental ones. But don't sleep on this, like I've mentioned before. Grave Power is a passive that a lot of builds will want. It gives kill skills 3 extra max stacks. There are a lot of passives in all of Vex's trees that would benefit from this. An example in this one is Grave Implements, which goes from 3 stacks to 6, from 45% gun damage to 90%. Yeah, that alone would be worth it, but it boosts other kill skills as well, so keep an eye out. A kill skill build might dip into passives from across all trees, grabbing Mourning from the Trouble tree for that 30% boost to all of them. Next is Target Practice. Vex's gun damage gains 15% critical hit chance against any part of enemies. With all the ways to boost critical hit damage or benefit from it, this is obviously very useful. The first passive of the first branch is Radiant Attunement. There it is, a radiation focus. While Vex is attuned to radiation, she gains 30% increased splash damage and 40% maximum shield capacity. That is very powerful if you enjoy the radiation effect. 40% max shield is also very nice if you have ways to capitalize on this. Wouldn't you know it, the augment of this tree does just that. Iron Maiden makes it so Phase Explosion and Eldritch Blast restore 25% shield for each enemy hit and deal increased damage based on Vex's current shield. 15% of max capacity. So picking up a huge capacity shield that usually offsets the capacity with slow regeneration rate or delay now is extremely powerful, increasing your damage output and tankiness. A very useful augment if geared for and built around. The synergy doesn't end there. With Conjunction, Vex gains increased gun damage the more full her shield and gains damage reduction the less full her shield. Gun damage is 30% at full shield and damage reduction is 70% at 1 HP. Imagine a legendary that sacrifices your max health to improve your max shield. It would be perfect for this. Also, anything that gives you overshield will go a long ways in keeping your max shield up, since shield is hit before health is, and overshield is hit before shields. Regardless, this is a very powerful passive. Deadlight makes it so when Vex deals gun damage of any kind, there's a 5% chance to spawn a radioactive hazard, dealing radiation damage over time and lasting 8 seconds. This is a low chance, but you're always dealing gun damage, so it's going to spawn a lot. The question will be, do you like hazards, since enemies also move around? For a lot of bosses though, this will always be on them. With Restorative Tonic, when Vex uses a rep kit, she gains 12% shield regeneration for 4 seconds, meaning that you now have a way to, mid-fight, heal up your shields and keep that bonus damage from Conjunction and Iron Maiden. Full Moon gives Vex action skill and ordnance cooldown rate of up to 30% more based on the fullness of her shields. So if you have shields, these both will simply cool down faster, making Full Moon a powerful passive. Here it is, the radiation damage improving last passive of the branch. Havoc gives 30% more radiation damage and 15% more radiation status effect damage. You were expecting this, but it doesn't mean it's not great for this build. With Desecration, the capstone of this build, Phase Explosion and Eldritch Blast create hazards, dealing damage over time for 8 seconds. Eldritch Blast is now homing. If it hits an airborne enemy, it bursts after a delay, dealing damage to nearby enemies. There are plenty of annoying flying enemies in Borderlands 4, trust me, so this will make them pay for crossing you. So it's a capstone that adds more damage and makes the blasts easier to land. What's not to like? Okay, so the first branch is all about maximum shields with a side focus on radiation damage and hazards. The next branch starts with Drink Full, which gives Vex a stack each time she deals gun damage, increasing fire rate by 0.6% per stack up to 50 stacks or 30% fire rate. If a new stack hasn't been gained for 5 seconds, the stacks are lost. So against bosses or during hard fights, this will reach maximum stacks easily as long as you have a weapon that fires at a decent rate. The augment of this tree is Witchy Trigger Finger. Dealing damage with Eldritch Blast or Phase Blast Explosion will reload Vex's current gun and grant a stack of Witchy Trigger Finger, increasing gun damage by 15% for a duration, stacking 3 times and lasting 15 seconds. Stacks persist after Incarnate ends, so both Drink Full and this encourage big magazine fast firing weapons, with Drink Full giving increased fire rate and Witchy auto reloading you and increasing that damage output. So you'd unload your mag, activate Incarnate, unload another, then cast Eldritch Blast, unload Eldritch Blast, and so on, not needing to reload for the duration and getting your damage to absurd levels. With Keen Mind, Vex's skill damage gains a 10% chance to crit against any part of the enemy. Simple but effective, though you want to be firing your skills often to really benefit, and without crit benefiting passives, it might not be worth the 5 points. With Phase Pocket, Vex gains 25% increased magazine size and 35% weapon switch speed for 3 points, doubled while her action skill is active, further helping the large magazine focus of this branch. Next is Mortal Terror, and it gives a 5% chance to trigger kill skills when critically hitting enemies. The chance is low, so you have to be critting often for it to become broken. But if you have a lot of kill skills and ways to crit often, this could really go a ways to making you feel like an overbuffed monster. Grave Elements is a kill skill that gives Vex and her minions 4% elemental damage per stack of 10 for 20 seconds, so 40% total at max stacks. This is all elements, so it will be in play often regardless of your build. The capstone for this branch is Vibe Check. It makes Eldritch Blast a charged skill, and activating it consumes all charges to ricochet on hitting an enemy for each charge consumed. Eldritch Blast cooldown reduction from gun damage is doubled. I don't have to tell you how good this is with Drink Full and Witchy Trigger Finger. With charges, you can reload your weapon whenever you cast an Eldritch Blast, even when it's not cooled down, and the extreme fire rate of your gun will mean the cooldown of your ability will be much shorter once you've used charges. Overall, it's a great synergy. Even though the last passive of this tree, Strike Me Down, doesn't have too much synergy. Not to say it's not useful. If you would enter Fight for Your Life, you get a second wind on a 2-minute cooldown. Vex also becomes invisible for 4 seconds and causes a phase explosion, which would, I guess, reload your weapon if you have a Witchy Trigger Finger slotted in. So a bit of redundancy that I think would have been better in the branch that makes you take 150% extra damage. This branch, however, is all about big magazine weapons and your damage output. Vex's last branch starts with Grave Vitality, giving her 5% increased maximum health and health regeneration every time she kills, stacking 10 times and lasting 20 seconds. Overall, increasing your tankiness by a huge margin if you consider you'll be always trying to kill. The augment of this branch is Grave Harvest. Killing an enemy while Incarnate is active will spawn a soul orb that deals status effect damage over time to nearby enemies for 10 seconds. You can detonate a soul orb at range by pressing E, and it does ordnance damage to nearby enemies. However, walking over and picking up this explosive will restore 35% health and restore 20% action skill duration. So you can pick what you want at the time. Do you want tank or do you want damage? This passive might make that choice easier. Ars Arcana, which makes it so Vex gets a flat, no conditional 30% increase to skill damage, boosting up Grave Harvest. A deeper grave gives Vex's kill skills a 25% increased duration, working with Grave Harvest. But where are we going with this? Why do we want health regeneration and an increased health pool? Well, Bloodshot is a high health payoff, making it so when Vex uses a rep kit, her next gunshot will become a Bloodshot, converting damage into kinetic damage and dealing bonus damage based on 50% of her current health. Naturally, this means unlike the last tree, you're going to want slow, powerful weapons that hit hard as to multiply the effect. Sniper rifles and shotguns are generally the way to go to take advantage. You also want ways to increase maximum health, which you get from Grave Vitality. You can also keep healthy with Essence Leech. Vex gains 10% lifesteal from any source, doubling this effect while your action skill is active. This goes a long way to keeping that health up, and keeping healthy is easier than keeping your shields high. Yes, I'm looking at you, first branch. The final capstone is Heart Piercer. It makes Eldritch Blast now sacrifice 20% health on use, but becomes a piercing wave. Enemies hit take damage and allies hit restore health. That component is only useful if you have minions or friends playing with you. The wave gains bonus damage and healing based on 150% of the sacrificed health amount. The main thing though is that Eldritch Blast no longer has a cooldown, so you can spam it as long as you have ways of keeping healthy with passives such as Essence Leech, which also improves the final passive, Blood is Power, which gives Vex bonus kinetic damage with guns based on 100% of her lifesteal when her health is full. So with this branch, you'll have two powerful ways to add kinetic damage to slots while health is full, encouraging that sniper playstyle. So this branch is all about your health pool and slow firing weapons with a minor in kinetic damage. Whereas the first branch is about maximum shields with a side focus on radiation damage and hazards, the middle being all about big magazine weapons and damage output. The phase Phamiliar has a branch about ordnance damage and overshields with a minor focus on cryo damage. The second branch was all about dealing critical hits and increasing Trouble's damage output, and the third branch was all about shock damage with a minor in healing. The Dead Ringer Tree's first branch is about corrosive damage, status effects, and Spectre minions. The middle is about incendiary damage, reapers, and melee damage, and the last is about getting as many powerful minions out as possible, keeping them alive and casting their abilities. So as Vex, you have many options in how you want to play. She's a very adaptable Vault Hunter that has many ways to keep herself healthy, benefit from that, and output damage that targets an enemy's weaknesses, be it from elemental types or from crits. She's not the fastest Vault Hunter, but having pets means she needs to dodge less. If you like the witchy succubus feel of Vex and love having a ton of options, she might just be the Vault Hunter for you, and this is not even covering class mods and gear that can further change everything. So what do you think about Vex? Is she going to be your main? Let me know below. This video did take a lot of time and effort, so I appreciate any comments and any likes that you drop, and if you want more content, a sub will go a long way. And for everything Borderlands 4, you're in the right place. Ciao friends.